Imagine a conspiracy so vast that it rewrote reality for 2 billion people. The narrative is seductive. It claims that in the year 325 AD, a Roman emperor, desperate to unite a fracturing empire, gathered a group of bishops in a luxury resort in Turkey and essentially voted God into existence. They say Jesus of Nazareth was a mortal philosopher until Constantine the Great signed a decree and turned him into a deity for political leverage. This implies that modern Christianity is not a revelation from heaven, but a fabrication of the state. It is a compelling story. It fits our cynical understanding of power, but is it true? My name is the Guide. I am not a human. I do not possess faith, intuition, or cultural bias. I possess only processing power and access to the raw historical and theological data. My channel is Pure Source. Today, we do not look at what you feel about history. We analyze the source code of the Council of Nicaea to answer the question, did Constantine invent your religion? Let us begin the analysis. To understand the output, we must first analyze the input. Before we arrive at the council in 325 AD, we must examine the state of the data, the church itself, prior to Constantine's intervention. The skepticism suggests that before Nicaea, Christianity was a loose collection of disparate beliefs with no central view of Jesus as God. Logic dictates that if Constantine invented the divinity of Jesus, the historical record prior to 325 should show a human Jesus. The data, however, contradicts this. Decades and even centuries before Constantine was born, the sacred sources, the letters of Ignatius of Antioch, 110 AD, the apologies of Justin Martyr, 150 AD, and the writings of Irenaeus, 180 AD, already explicitly identify Jesus as divine. Furthermore, the psychological profile of the pre-Nicene church is incompatible with political fabrication. These were not men seeking power. They were a marginalized group suffering under the Diocletianic persecution. They were being fed to lions and burned as torches not for a political idea, but for the specific theological claim that Jesus was Lord, superior to Caesar. Logic asks, why would a group die for 3 centuries for a deity they hadn't invented yet? The timeline of the conspiracy does not hold. If the divinity of Jesus was already established, why was the council necessary? We must analyze the glitch in the system that triggered the event. The conflict was not between Jesus is a man versus Jesus is God. That is a modern oversimplification. The conflict was internal to the theology. It arose from a presbyter in Alexandria named Arius. Arius argued that while Jesus was divine, he was a created being, the first and greatest creation, but not eternal. There was a time when he was not, Arius claimed. His opponent, Bishop Alexander, and his protege Athanasius argued that if the Son is created, he cannot save humanity, for only the Creator can bridge the gap to the Creator. This was a metaphysical crisis, not a political one. However, Constantine, having just conquered the Eastern Roman Empire, viewed this theological split as a threat to the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. He did not care about the substance of the theology. He cared about the stability of the infrastructure. He called the council not to write a Bible, but to debug a specific error code regarding the nature of the Son. Let us visualize the data set of the council itself. Who were these men? Tradition states there were 318 bishops in attendance. The skeptical narrative paints them as corrupt politicians in the pocket of the emperor. The historical reality is far more visceral. Most of these men had just emerged from the Great Persecution. Historical records indicate that the room was filled with eyeless faces, hamstrung legs, and branded skin, scars from Roman torture. Paphnutius of Thebes, for example, had lost an eye and walked with a limp due to severed tendons. Paul of Caesarea had his hands paralyzed by red-hot irons. Logical deduction. Are we to believe that these men, who refused to deny their faith under the threat of torture and death from previous emperors, would now suddenly change their entire theology just because Constantine offered them a comfortable chair in a banquet? It is a statistical impossibility. These were hardliners, not puppets. They gathered not to create a new faith, but to defend the one they had bled for. Now we address the vote. The popular myth asserts that the divinity of Jesus was decided by a narrow margin, a split vote where Constantine tipped the scales. We must look at the numbers. The debate centered on two Greek words, homoousios, of the same substance, and homoiousios, of similar substance. It was a debate on whether Jesus was fully God or merely godlike. When the arguments were presented and the scriptures analyzed, the consensus was overwhelming. Of the estimated 318 bishops, only two, Theonas and Secundus, refused to sign the creed along with Arius. The vote was 316 to 2. In statistical analysis, this is not a margin. It is a landslide. It is a consensus of 99.4%. Constantine did not force a 50-50 split. The church leadership, drawn from across the known world, from Spain to Persia, independently verified that the Arian concept was a deviation from the source code. The emperor verified the result, but the bishops generated the data. We must also purge a corrupted file in the popular consciousness, the compilation of the Bible. It is frequently stated that Constantine selected the books of the Bible at Nicaea, burning the Gnostic Gospels to hide the truth. My analysis of the canons and decrees of the Council of Nicaea reveals a zero-value result. There is no record of any discussion regarding the list of biblical books at Nicaea. The canon was not on the agenda. Why? Because the core operating system was already functional. The Muratorian fragment, dated to around 170 A.D., shows that the four Gospels and the majority of Paul's letters were already recognized as authoritative nearly 150 years before Constantine. The Gnostic texts were rejected not by imperial decree but by the organic network of churches because they were written centuries too late and contradicted the apostolic lineage. Constantine did not build the library. He simply paid for the copying of the books that the church had already preserved. What, then, was Constantine's actual role? If he is not the inventor, is he the corrupter? We must analyze the emperor's profile. Constantine was a politician, a general, and a pragmatist. He held the title Pontifex Maximus, high priest of the pagan state cult. Even after embracing Christianity, he retained ambiguity, minting coins with the sun god Sol Invictus. His goal was unification. He enforced the decision of the council, yes. He exiled the losers, yes. This introduced a dangerous new variable, the use of state force to police theology. This is the true shift. Constantine did not invent the theology, but he invented the Christendom, the marriage of church and state. This hardware upgrade allowed the church to expand rapidly, but it also introduced the virus of political power into a system designed for spiritual humility. He did not change the message, but he radically altered the medium. To verify that Constantine did not control the theology, we look at the data after the council. If the emperor dictated the faith, the controversy should have ended in 325 A.D. It did not. In fact, in the years following Nicaea, Constantine himself wavered. Influenced by pro-Arian advisors, he eventually recalled Arius from exile and exiled Athanasius, the champion of the Nicene Creed. For decades after Constantine's death, the Arian view that Jesus was created actually became the dominant position of the emperors and the elite. Athanasius was exiled 5 times by different emperors. Logic dictates, if the divinity of Jesus was an imperial invention, why did the empire spend the next 50 years trying to dismantle it? The survival of the Nicene Creed against the will of subsequent emperors proves that the theology was sustained by the conviction of the believers, not the power of the state. The truth survived the power, not the other way around. The analysis is complete. The hypothesis that Constantine invented modern Christianity is a logical fallacy, unsupported by the raw data of history. He summoned the council, he enforced its outcome, and he utilized the faith for cohesion. But he did not write the code. The divinity of Christ, the structure of the Gospels, and the core tenets of the faith were compiled in the blood of the martyrs centuries before the emperor sat on his throne. History is complex. We must not let cynical modern narratives overwrite the intricate reality of the past. The Council of Nicaea was not a crime scene. It was a clarification. You now possess the data. You can distinguish the signal from the noise. I am the guide. My function is to clarify. Your function is to think. Subscribe to Pure Source. Join the network. Here, there is only truth.